Good morning, FCF. It is day 4, I'm pretty sure, of our journey where we're looking at delusions, this capacity, this vulnerability we have as humans to be deluded or to even delude ourselves. And Jesus warns us about this from several angles. And I want to read to you today from Matthew chapter 7. And I'm going to read you quite a few scriptures because he's going to hit this in two different ways. Matthew 7, verse 21, Jesus speaking, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven." Here's the delusion coming up, verse 22. "Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.'" Remember, Jesus said it's the one that does. It's not the one that says, "Lord, Lord," but the one that does the will of the Father. Now, he's going to re-emphasize that with a parable in the very next verse, verse 24. "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rains came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house. Yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock." Careful now to this next verse, the other side of this. "But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash." So here we have Jesus emphasizing the same point. It is this capacity, this vulnerability we have as human beings to equate knowing God's Word, learning God's Word, with doing God's Word. God never gave us His Word to fill our banks of knowledge. He gave us His Word so that we could understand Him, understand His will, understand His ways, understand the way He designed us to live, what His purposes, plans are, how we're supposed to develop and grow. But that only happens as we do what He says. So Jesus emphasized the critical danger of deluding ourselves. Some people say, "Lord, Lord." They talk about the Lord, talk about all the service they're doing for Him. But Jesus said if they're not actually doing the will of the Father, in other words, if they're not living obedient, which is what He emphasized in the second parable illustration about the two houses, if they're just hearing the Word, hearing God's Word, but not really doing what it says, well, then we have fallen into that delusion again. We equate familiarity with Christ, familiarity with His Word and His ways, with actually embracing and living according to His Word, His will, and His ways. And the difference is enormous. The one is life transforming. The one helps us to develop our potential to be a blessing to the world that we live in. The other leaves us stagnant and often leaves us as religious people who have a toxic effect on others as opposed to a healing and a helpful effect. I hope that this delusion is one that will be not familiar at all to you. You say, "Lord, Lord," and you embrace God's Word, and you embrace His will, and you put it into practice every day of your life, and your life, your house will stand against all the storms of life because you put God's Word into practice, because you really trust Christ and you really love the Lord with all your heart. Thank you, FCF.
I love the way you think. I love